Alright, let's talk some basic left hand technique for guitar. So, first thing, if you're an absolute beginner, would just be figuring out how to change the notes on the fretboard. So these metal things are called the frets, and it's easiest to start on the open high E string, so the string closest to the ground. And you can hear if we play that open, and then if I put, let's say, my second finger, and I'll put it on the third fret, so I'll count up 1, 2, 3, and I'll go right by the fret and I'll push down, and you can hear how it changes the tone. So that'd be the absolute most basic thing you could try. If you're pushing down, if you're not pushing down hard enough, it'll sound like that. And obviously, any more pressure than is needed to make the note ring out cleanly is too much. Okay, so you don't want to just push down absolutely as hard as you can either. So you want to find that balance between not hard enough and then making sure you're not kind of doing a death grip, because that'll create tension, which you don't want. The other thing with the frets is that you want to be right up next to the fret without being right on top of it. So if I'm right on top of the third fret, it sounds like that. If I'm too far away, it sounds like that. Also doesn't sound very good. But if I'm right, kind of touching the fret but not right on top of it, that's where you get the cleanest sounding note. And every guitar is a little bit different. It depends on how your guitar is set up to find that absolute sweet spot. But most times it's right by the fret without being right on top of it. And this technique applies to banjo and mandolin as well. So any fretted instrument, really, normally the technique is to be right next to the fret without being right on top of it. Okay? So I would start on the high string, and you can try as you get better moving down, and obviously you're going to need more strength down here to change the notes of the thicker strings than you will on the higher strings. That's why I recommend starting up here. Just a little bit easier to start with. Okay, so try putting your second finger on different frets and different strings. I'd probably start with your second or first finger. Those are the two strongest. You could try with your first finger as well. And it doesn't really matter what notes you're playing. You don't need to worry about any scales yet or anything. Just practice, especially if you're a beginner, just practice how much pressure you need to get down. You can try it with your third finger as well. And eventually your pinky is going to be the trickiest. That's usually the most stubborn. But basically, eventually you want all 4 fingers to be able to push down different notes. Very rarely will you use your thumb to push down notes. Most times it's going to be your 4 fingers, okay? So I would try, you can start on the high strings, just pushing down all those different notes. The other thing you could do would be try to play 2 notes between 2 different fingers. So let's say I have my first finger down on the second fret, and then I can add my second finger on the third fret and change the pitch. What I don't want to do is lift my first finger up when I put my second finger down. Whatever I'm adding in front of the notes cancels out what's behind it. So I don't need to lift that finger up. I don't need to do this. See how much more work that is if I lift my first finger up? Whereas if I just keep that finger down, I can go right back and forth very easily. So you could practice adding all your fingers. So I could do 2, 3, 4, 5, and just see if I can keep my fingers down. That's a good stretching exercise. Or you could eventually try playing, again, between all your different fingers. So maybe keep your first finger down, try adding your second finger, and then go back. Do that a few times. And then see if you can do it with your third finger and first finger. And then first finger and pinky. You're just trying to keep these ones down behind it, which is tricky. The natural tendency is to want to lift everything up. You could try it with your second and third finger. Second and pinky, third and pinky. Any combination, you can go backwards. Don't worry what notes you're playing at first. Just get used to moving around and figuring out how much pressure you need. You could practice skipping between different strings and different fingers. You know, I'm not worrying at all what notes I'm playing, or I mean, eventually you can add scales and stuff too. That's good practice. And we'll get into that in later lessons. But just for this basic left-hand technique, just figure out how much pressure you need to push down. The other thing I kind of think about, like I said, with keeping my fingers down, is I keep my finger down until the absolute longest time to lift it up. You can kind of use your previous finger as your anchor that helps you connect to the next one. I kind of think of it like rock climbing. You know, like if you had one hand and you were going to reach for the next one, you wouldn't let off your left hand until your right one was secure. So kind of the same thing with your fingers. If I'm going between my first finger and my pinky, I don't lift off my first finger until I know I've got my first finger down. And that can really help you connect the tone. Obviously, if you're lifting everything up, it's going to cut off the pressure, okay? Other little basic left-hand technique things I recommend is, and everyone's wrist and hand is a little bit different, so you got to experiment, but I'd resist the urge to be back like this at all. If I move the guitar away and my hand looks like it's in like a painful position, or if it looks like I could hold like a tray of food, I usually, you know, I recommend against that. Basically, it's going to put a lot of tension in your forearm when you bend your hand back like that. At least it does for me. You can try it and see. But basically, we want to avoid... I think the reason why people do this, and I understand it, is because as you're a beginner, it feels like you want to hold the guitar with your left hand to keep it secure. And that's why you want to do that. But basically, what we eventually want to do is be able to hold the guitar without our left hand at all. So our left hand is actually completely free to move around as much as we need it to. And we only, you know, our left hand is basically a guide, but we're not using it to support the guitar at all. And that's super important as you get moving around the neck, because you can get a lot of mileage by grabbing the guitar at first, because you might not be moving this way a lot, but eventually you will be, so you need your hand to be free. The other thing, again, is if your hand is bent like this or like this in this crazy position, it's going to be really hard to sustain that and play for an extended period of time. So that's another thing to think about. The other thing you can see is I've got a little bit of room, you know, between my finger. I don't know if you can see that on the camera, but basically I'm not snug up against the guitar like that. You know, my thumb's not completely back behind the neck, maybe like you would in classical guitar. It's basically kind of hanging out up here. But again, I'm not gripping the neck to where everything is tight. I've still got room. The other thing with left-hand technique, we talked about playing notes on different strings, or on the same string rather, excuse me, the same string with different fingers. But the other thing you want to be able to do is play two fingers on two different strings and get all the notes to ring out. So for example, you could put your pinky up on the 3rd fret of the high string, your 3rd finger on the 3rd fret of the 2nd string. Like, it'd basically be the top 2 fingers of a bluegrass G chord, and you can do what's called the string test, where you just play them each one at a time. You know, and if you hear a clunker, then you got to adjust your left-hand technique a little bit. We need all those notes to be able to ring out. You know. So again, that takes some practice and some adjusting. And you can start with 2 fingers of the chord if you need to, and then add your 3rd finger. And again, you're gonna have to do a little bit of adjusting. But like I said, I'd resist the urge to bend back too much like this. You might have to do a little bit of this. But sometimes on guitar and especially mandolin, is the difference between success and failure can be a very small change. You don't need to do this massive shift. Sometime between, you know, the note not ringing out and then being fine is you know, the difference of a millimeter or a centimeter move. So sometimes it can be a very small move, but what I would do is just keep doing that string test. Just get all your notes to ring out, even if you're playing single notes, wherever you are on the neck. Again, don't worry about what notes you're playing at first. up your accuracy and strength. And that's going to take some time, especially with your pinky. I know when I started, my pinky was really wimpy. Like I'd try and push down a note and it would like shake. It was so wimpy. And that takes some time to build up the strength in your fingers. So I definitely don't expect you to get that overnight. But basically what you're practicing is, I would add this to your kind of your warm-up when you're starting your practice session. Maybe just do a little bit of that, kind of moving between the fingers. You know, again, don't worry about what notes you're doing, but that's just a good way to start getting your left hand strengthening. And then just trust your judgment of what sounds good. Obviously, you want your hand to stay relaxed. If your hand is hurting, that's not going to be sustainable. But if you're not getting good tone, that's also not going to be sustainable. All right, give that some practice, and hopefully that helps you out. All right, good luck.